Hey, welcome to the briefing. What I'm going to cover with you today is this. There is nowhere to promote me. How do I keep developing? I got a question that looks like a career problem at first, but the more I worked through it, the more I realized there are really two people who need the answer. One is the person sitting inside a smaller organization looking up and wondering where the next opportunity is supposed to come from. The other is the senior leader looking down at that organization who may not realize that the promotion structure and the leadership development structure have quietly become the same thing. Once those two structures become the same thing, development starts waiting on vacancies instead of preparing people before the vacancy ever shows up. The question goes something like this. I work in a smaller organization where there are only a limited number of supervisory positions. People can stay in those positions for years, so promotion usually depends on somebody leaving, retiring, or moving somewhere else. I came from an environment where development was much more structured. There were schools, increasing responsibilities, defined expectations, and a clearer sense of what you were supposed to be developing toward. Here I can keep doing my job well, take specialized assignments, build experience, and become more capable. But none of that means a leadership opportunity will actually open. I want to lead, and I do not want to spend years waiting for somebody to leave before I begin preparing for greater responsibility. At the same time, I do not want to become so focused on promotion that I confuse getting a title with actually becoming a better leader. How do I keep developing when promotion opportunities are limited, and how do I know when the organization itself has become part of the problem? That is a legitimate question. Before I answer it, I want to remove one easy assumption because it can poison the entire read if you let it. Do not look around your organization, see people who are not chasing supervisory rank, and decide they lack drive. Somebody may be highly driven toward technical mastery, investigations, instruction, field work, specialized assignments, customer relationships, engineering, production, clinical practice, or whatever the actual work is in their field. Formal supervision is not the only respectable expression of ambition. The fact that somebody does not want your career path does not mean they do not have one. And I want to be careful with that because people who come from highly structured advancement environments can make this mistake pretty easily. You get used to progress having visible markers, rank changes, schools, assignments, positions, increased scope. Then you enter a smaller organization where somebody can be exceptionally competent for 10 years and their title barely changes. If you are not careful, you start assuming movement equals ambition and stability equals complacency. That is not an accurate read. The real issue is structural. In a small organization, the number of positions above you can remain almost completely unchanged while your capability keeps increasing. There may be 4 first-line supervisor positions today, and there may still be 4 or 5 years from now. Nobody necessarily did anything wrong because the math is just the math. A 25-person company may only need 2 managers. A municipal department may only have a handful of sergeants and lieutenants. A healthcare office may need 1 practice manager, and a small manufacturing operation may only support a few supervisory positions. The organization cannot manufacture leadership vacancies simply because several capable people are ready for more. But that creates a second problem that senior leaders absolutely can control. If the organization only begins developing somebody when a vacancy appears, then the organization has confused promotion with development. A vacancy is an event, while development is a system. Those are not the same thing, and that is the controlling point I want to build this entire mailbag around. A promotion process answers the question, who gets the seat? A leadership development system answers a much more important question before the seat is empty. Has anybody actually been prepared to carry what that seat requires? If your answer is, we will figure that out when the position posts, you are already late. At that point, the vacancy announcement has apparently been promoted to Director of Leadership Development, Chief Succession Officer, and Emergency Spiritual Medium for determining who might be ready. Funny title, terrible workforce strategy. The organization does not need a giant corporate succession program to fix this. It does not need every employee inside a color-coded talent matrix or a 6-page development plan that everybody signs and nobody reads again. Senior leadership needs to know what the next level requires, who is developing toward it, what those people still need, and what legitimate opportunities can create the repetitions before the organization desperately needs somebody. I came out of the Army, so I want to use the Army as part of the comparison because there are things that get structurally right that smaller organizations can learn from. There are also things about that model that a small police department, municipal organization, or small business would be crazy to copy. The solution is not to turn a 30-person organization into a miniature Pentagon so 3 people can receive a quarterly counseling statement, but there is a principle underneath the Army model that matters. The Army treats leader development as something that happens across a career. Institutional education matters, operational experience matters, self-development matters, progressive responsibility matters, and different assignments and repetitions matter. A person is supposed to become more capable over time through some combination of education, experience, feedback, responsibility, and deliberate development. That architecture matters because the next position is not supposed to be the first time you discover. The next position requires different capability. The system is trying to build capability before the responsibility becomes completely yours. A soldier moves through progressive professional education. An NCO can move through operational assignments, training roles, staff roles, broadening opportunities, developmental positions, and increasing responsibility. The exact system changes, and anybody who has been in the Army long enough also knows that what the personnel model says should happen and what happens at 16:30 on a Friday can occasionally be distant relatives. I am not romanticizing the bureaucracy. I am saying the institutional premise is strong. Develop people progressively, expose them to broader responsibility, educate them before the responsibility becomes completely theirs, give them experience, assess performance, and make them carry more complexity. Do not simply wait until the chair becomes empty. A second advantage is developmental expectation. As responsibility increases, the work is expected to broaden. Technical competence still matters, but eventually you have to understand people, training, planning, resources, readiness, accountability, communication, and the organization beyond your immediate task. That matters because technical excellence and leadership readiness are not the same thing. You can be outstanding at your current work and still be unprepared to lead people doing that work. That is not an insult because they are different capability sets. The military model at least recognizes that increasing responsibility requires different preparation. You do not just say, well, she was the best technician, so apparently she now understands personnel management. There are supposed to be educational requirements, developmental gates, assignments, and increasing expectations intended to bridge that gap. Intended is doing some work in that sentence, because execution is not perfect. I'm going to take a little side quest here. And this is where I have very little patience for organizations that say, we have always developed people after they get the position, and it has worked for us. No, what you have proven is that some people were able to survive your development model, not that the model was good. People do not develop capability at the same rate, through the same experiences, or under the same conditions. And if somebody cannot learn effectively inside the one narrow environment you created, that does not automatically mean they are a poor fit for leadership. It may mean they are a poor fit for your leadership style, your training method, or a system that has confused selection with development and then congratulate itself every time somebody managed to overcome it. You do not get to sit back, provide one developmental path, wait to see who survives it, and call the survivors natural leaders. That is not talent development. That is organizational natural selection with a training calendar. Talent does not grow on trees, fully formed, waiting for somebody to pin a rank on it. You identify potential, expose people to different forms of responsibility, teach them, challenge them, observe them, correct them, give them another repetition, and deliberately build capability over time. And there is another part of this that senior leaders need to own. If your model is, we promote them first and then teach them the responsibility, you are not avoiding development. You are postponing it until the consequences are higher. Now the person is learning performance correction while somebody's career is on the other side of the conversation. They are learning decision making while the team is waiting on the decision. They are learning delegation while real work is being assigned. and they are learning accountability while everybody underneath them is already absorbing the consequences. You moved the classroom into the live operation and acted like that somehow reduced the training requirement. Then when somebody struggles, organizations love reaching for the phrase, not a good fit. Slow the read. Not a good fit for what? Leadership? Or not a good fit for the one developmental method the current leader knows how to provide? If the only people who succeed under you are people who think like you, communicate like you, learn at your pace, and respond well to the exact way you were developed, you may not be identifying leadership talent. You may be cloning yourself badly. And this is how I came up is not evidence that the system should continue. That is survivorship bias with rank on it. You're looking at the people who made it through the model and using their existence as proof that the model works while conveniently ignoring everybody. The model failed to develop, failed to retain, or never gave a meaningful chance. Good organizations do not sit around hoping leadership talent survives the environment. They create conditions that develop it. Talent is not a crop you discover growing behind the station, shop, or headquarters. Potential has to be identified, challenged, coached, exposed to responsibility, corrected, tested again, and given progressively harder repetitions. You do not manufacture leadership out of nothing, but you absolutely influence whether the capability that is there gets developed or wasted. Senior leaders who refuse to accept that are not protecting a proven development model. They are protecting the method that happens to be most comfortable for them. All right, now that I got that out of my system, let's continue. Large systems can become obsessed with gates. Complete this school, serve this much time, hold this position, get this evaluation, hit this milestone, then move at roughly this point. Structure can create discipline, but it can also create bureaucracy. And this is where Army bureaucracy can get so committed to leader development that it practically develops its own ecosystem. Somewhere a 47-slide briefing explains how to create adaptive leaders, while the future adaptive leader is outside pulling staff duty because the unit is short. And slide 38 contains an acronym explaining why this is technically part of the development model. The visual is ridiculous, but the operating point is real. Administrative compliance can begin substituting for actual development. The institution can start confusing completion with capability. Somebody attended the school, therefore they are developed. Somebody held the position, therefore they mastered the position. Somebody checked the right developmental block, therefore development occurred. Eventually the checklist starts supervising the person it was supposed to develop. No. A course is exposure and a position is opportunity. Neither automatically proves capability. Large personnel systems carry another problem that smaller organizations do not necessarily have. Institutional need can overpower developmental need. The person goes where the organization has a vacancy, and the assignment may be perfect development for them or it may not be. Either way, somebody has to fill the billet. A massive organization can rotate people through thousands of positions, while a 30-person organization cannot. The Army can say, you are going somewhere completely different for the next 3 years. The small police chief may be looking at the schedule saying, I need you on nights Tuesday because I have exactly enough people to cover the road. A business owner may completely understand that developing a future operations manager is important while simultaneously knowing that 3 customer orders need to ship by 5, and the person they want to develop is the only person who understands why the production schedule just collapsed. Both conditions are real. That is why copying the system fails. Take the principle and leave the mass. Take progressive development, deliberate exposure, preparation before promotion, broader capability for broader responsibility, and serious succession planning. Then make all of it small enough that a chief, owner, director, or department head can actually execute it without creating a separate bureaucracy whose full-time job is documenting the development nobody has time to perform. Small organizations need developmental discipline, not a personnel cathedral. There is a difference. Now bring that into policing. I am not going to make this a story about police departments being uniquely bad at leadership development, because that would be inaccurate and lazy. A lot of organizations have this problem. Policing simply makes the structural pressure easy to see because the rank structure is visible. Smaller agencies have a finite number of positions, and immediate staffing requirements can compete directly with developmental opportunity. The current staffing picture also needs to be read accurately. Police Executive Research Forum data released in May of 2026 showed staffing among responding agencies had improved and returned roughly to 2022 levels. Hiring increased sharply in 2025. Resignations were relatively stable compared with the prior year, while retirements increased. That matters because I do not want to use the worst numbers from several years ago and pretend nothing changed just because the old crisis narrative is convenient. At the same time, staffing pressure did not disappear. The International Association of Chiefs of Police reported in its national recruitment and retention work that more than 70% of surveyed agencies said recruiting was harder than it had been 5 years earlier. Responding agencies were operating, on average, at about 91% of authorized staffing, and about 65% reported reducing services or specialized units because of staffing challenges, often protecting essential patrol functions first. Stop on that for a second, because that is not only a staffing fact, that is a development fact. If staffing gets tight, what does a small department protect first? Calls for service, patrol coverage, and immediate public safety requirements. That is understandable. You cannot tell somebody waiting on an emergency response that the officer is unavailable because the department is currently protecting a very thoughtful succession development initiative. Immediate operational requirements matter, but what gets squeezed are specialized assignments, training time, cross-functional opportunities, projects, community programs, shadowing, and professional development opportunities. Anything not essential to today's coverage can become vulnerable. Again, that decision may be completely reasonable this week. The problem appears when this week's emergency becomes the permanent developmental model, because then short staffing starts eating the leadership pipeline. Coverage pressure pulls people back toward immediate essential work. Developmental opportunities disappear, and training becomes harder to protect. Experienced people carry more work because they can perform it faster. Less experienced people get fewer controlled repetitions, while experienced supervisors continue carrying responsibilities because there is no spare capacity to let someone else learn. Then somebody retires. Now the vacancy exists, and leadership looks around asking, who is ready? This is where the staffing logic gets so stupid, it becomes visual. The chief, captain, HR representative, and whoever owns the promotional process are standing around the empty sergeant chair like it is a crime scene, while the evidence markers are sitting next to 3 years of canceled training, pulled specialty assignments, and every developmental opportunity sacrificed to tonight's minimum staffing. Funny picture, real consequence. The empty chair did not kill succession planning because the organization had been slowly strangling it every time tomorrow lost a resource fight with today. That is the cycle senior leaders have to see. You can make a perfectly reasonable short-term staffing decision and still create a long-term capability problem if you never replace the developmental opportunity you removed. Both things can be true. The Department of Justice has increasingly framed police staffing as a system rather than simply a headcount equation, and I think that is the stronger read. Workload, deployment, recruitment, retention, training, succession planning, leadership, organizational learning, culture, and resources interact. You can solve one piece and weaken another if you do not understand the relationship. You can hire your way into a leadership development problem. You can fill every authorized position and still have a weak bench. You can have technically capable people who have never been deliberately prepared to supervise. You can have a schedule that looks healthy, while the organization remains dangerously dependent on 3 people who hold most of the institutional judgment. You can have a promotion system and still have no leadership pipeline. Those are completely different conditions. That distinction matters because first-line supervisors are where organizational intent collides with reality every day. Policy gets interpreted there, expectations become behavior there, work gets assigned there, and performance gets corrected there. Information moves upward or dies there, decisions under pressure happen there, and people decide whether they trust leadership there. So if the first time you meaningfully prepare somebody for first-line supervision is after they receive the rank, your sequence is backwards. Promote the person, give them the title, access, authority, responsibility for other people, and consequences they have never carried before, then start explaining leadership. That is a hell of a practical exam, and policing is not alone. Gallup published research in 2026 on frontline supervisors across industries, and the numbers should make any senior leader pay attention. 65% of frontline supervisors surveyed said they obtained the role based on frontline performance or years of experience. Only 30% said supervisory skills, prior supervisory experience, or entering as a supervisor was the basis. Nearly a quarter said they had never participated in supervisor training. Think about the operating assumption underneath that. You are good at the work, therefore you should lead the people doing the work. Apparently, technical excellence now comes bundled with a surprise subscription to personnel management, conflict resolution, performance counseling, and somebody crying in your office at 9:15 on a Wednesday. The subscription renews automatically, and sometimes that works. Sometimes the person is technically excellent and has strong leadership capacity. Sometimes the organization takes its best technician out of the work they are exceptional at, gives them 6 employees, and discovers that knowing how to personally produce an outstanding result has very little to do with knowing how to produce that result through other people. Now the employee is miserable, the team is miserable, the organization lost technical output, and everybody got to attend a promotion ceremony, so apparently we nailed it. Promotion accomplished, capability pending. That is why this is bigger than one department or one profession. Small businesses live inside the same structural problem. Imagine a company with 22 employees. The owner has 1 operations manager and maybe 2 team leads. 1 employee is outstanding. Customers trust them. They know the systems. They know the product. They solve problems before the owner hears about them, and they know which vendor will answer the phone. They also know which customer needs extra communication, where the weird process exception lives, and what actually happens when the spreadsheet says one thing but the operation is doing something else. Everybody agrees this person has potential. Now what? The operations manager is not leaving, and the company does not need another manager. Creating vice president of looking extremely promotable does not solve the structural problem, so the employee stays in the same title. Now 2 bad responses become tempting. The employee says, "There's no future here," and leaves before anybody examines whether development can occur without promotion. Or leadership says, "We really value you," and rewards that potential with an additional 17 responsibilities, no meaningful change in authority, no developmental design, and no recognition beyond being told how indispensable they are. That is not a leadership pipeline. That is workload accumulation wearing a compliment. And this is where I want to sharpen something, because development, responsibility, recognition, compensation, and promotion interact. But they are not interchangeable. Promotion is movement into a different position, while development is increased capability. Responsibility is what you are being asked to own. Recognition is how the organization acknowledges increased contribution. Compensation is part of the value exchange. You can have development without promotion. You can have promotion without development. You can have responsibility without authority, which is usually a mess. And you can have increased responsibility without meaningful recognition, which eventually becomes a retention problem. And those conditions have to be separated if senior leaders are going to manage them intelligently. Otherwise, every conversation about growth eventually collapses into, well, there is no open position. That is not a development strategy. So let's put a senior leader inside the problem. Imagine a small municipal organization with roughly 35 sworn personnel. I am keeping this illustrative because I am not describing a specific department or claiming this exact sequence happened in one place. Several first-line supervisors have been there for years. One announces retirement. The chief has always known somebody would eventually retire, but there was always something more immediate: staffing, budget, vehicles, training, scheduling, a policy revision, a difficult incident, recruitment, retention, a city requirement, another person leaving. Normal organizational life. Now the retirement is real, the vacancy exists, and the chief has good officers. Several are technically strong. One has field training experience, one has specialized investigative experience, one is respected by peers, One has strong administrative ability, one has seniority, and one performs well on written assessments. Now the chief starts asking harder questions. Who has actually practiced correcting another employee's performance? Who has had to make a decision people did not like and still maintain professional trust? Who can assign work instead of simply doing the work personally? Who can distinguish friendship from supervisory responsibility? Who can brief upward? Who can carry a problem across departments? Who can see the whole shift instead of only their own task? Who accepts accountability cleanly? Who can make a decision with incomplete information? Who knows when to step in and when to stay out? Who has developed another person? Who has demonstrated any of this enough that the first day as a supervisor will not also be the first meaningful repetition? And the answer comes back something like, well, we have some ideas. That is the failure point, not the retirement. The retirement exposed it. The vacancy simply revealed that readiness had never been made visible. The department has a promotion process, but the leadership pipeline apparently exists in the same mysterious location as the one spare radio battery everybody swears somebody else signed for. That is not succession. Now move the same problem into the small business. The operations manager resigns and gives 2 weeks' notice. The owner looks around. Everybody knows part of the business, but nobody has been deliberately developed to run the business. One person knows customers, one knows inventory, one knows scheduling, one is great with people, and one knows every operational exception because they have personally fixed all of them for 7 years. What looked like a personnel decision becomes a continuity problem. That is why I keep coming back to the same line. If leadership development begins when the vacancy appears, you are already late. So what does a senior leader actually do? Not theoretically, what do you build? First, define the capability of the next role before you start naming candidates. Most organizations naturally do this backwards. They start with names. Who has been here longest? Who wants it? Who is strongest technically? Who scores well? Who has seniority? And who does the current leadership team trust? Some of those factors may matter depending on policy, civil service rules, bargaining agreements, law, or the role. None of them answers the first question. What does successful performance in this responsibility actually require? For a first-line leader, that may include setting expectations, assigning work, making decisions under uncertainty, handling conflict, correcting performance, developing people, communicating upward and downward, managing competing priorities, escalating appropriately, and accepting accountability for results produced through the team. Keep the profile observable. You should be able to ask, have I actually seen this person do that? Not merely I think they could. Start with the responsibility. If you start with a favored person, you will be tempted to redesign the requirement around them. That is how preference quietly puts on a tie, opens a spreadsheet, and introduces itself to the room as succession planning. Second, identify the bench before you need it. You do not need expensive talent software because you need an accurate read. Conceptually, use 3 conditions: ready now, ready next, and developing. Ready now means the person has demonstrated enough relevant capability that a transition would be reasonable with normal support. Ready next means meaningful capability is present, but specific gaps still need repetitions. Developing means the person has potential or interest but needs broader foundational growth before that level of responsibility would be responsible. Then finish the sentence. Ready next. Because the technical judgment is strong but performance correction is weak. Ready next because the person communicates well but has limited planning experience. Ready next because they still solve everything personally instead of developing others. Ready next because they accept responsibility for their own work, but have not demonstrated accountability for results produced through a team. That sentence turns potential into a development target. And this is where justice matters. You have to be willing to tell somebody who wants the position that they are not ready yet. Senior leadership cannot become so afraid of disappointing people that it refuses to make a capability judgment. If somebody is not ready, tell them accurately. Do not say, you need more experience, when what you really mean is, you avoid difficult performance conversations. Do not hide a capability gap behind vague language. And do not tell somebody they lack readiness when the actual problem is simply that no vacancy exists. One is a development issue, and the other is a structural fact. Those are completely different conditions. Third, Create deliberate leadership repetitions before promotion. You cannot classroom your way into judgment. Education matters. Mentorship matters. Courses matter. But eventually the person has to do something. They have to make decisions, communicate, coordinate, receive pushback, coach someone, handle a handoff, own a mistake, and see how their choices affect somebody downstream. They have to experience the difference between personally solving a problem and creating the conditions where other people can solve it. That is leadership development. In a police environment, legitimate repetitions may include training responsibilities, contained projects, event planning, after-action discussions, cross-unit coordination, field training when qualified, shadowing experienced supervisors, briefings, or controlled acting responsibilities where policy allows. Do not manufacture fake authority. The person does not need to pretend to hold the next rank. They need opportunities to practice the capabilities that can legitimately be practiced inside the authority they currently have. Communication, planning, coordination, teaching, problem ownership, accountability, decision-making inside defined limits, reflection, and follow-through can all be developed before the title changes. Before assigning the work, ask what capability you are trying to develop. If you cannot answer that, you may have just found somebody competent and given them more work. That is not development. That is delegation, wearing gym clothes, and calling itself a stretch assignment. A small business has even more flexibility. Lead the morning production meeting, own the customer recovery issue, train the new employee, coordinate the inventory correction, run the improvement effort, manage a vendor problem, or own a contained project. Conduct the after-action discussion and brief what happened. But again, ask what capability the assignment is supposed to develop. Do not let stretch assignment become organizational code for we found the person who complains least. Development has to produce something more than fatigue. And fourth, evaluate the repetition. Experience is not self-converting. The person led the project, fine, but what happened? How did they plan? How did they communicate? Where did they lose control? Did they hoard the work? Did they avoid conflict? And did they adjust when conditions changed? Did the team understand the objective? What would they do differently next time? That reflection is where experience starts becoming judgment. Otherwise, you can expose somebody to the same mistake 10 times and call it 10 years of experience. Repetition without reflection can make a weak habit very well practiced. Fifth, use lateral assignments deliberately and build more than one legitimate path for growth. A specialized assignment can be highly developmental, but only if it changes capability. Does it expose the person to broader decisions, different stakeholders, planning, technical depth, project ownership, training, resource constraints, or a different level of consequence? If yes, it may materially improve professional range. If the person moves to a different chair and learns almost nothing new, do not sell that as development because the parking spot changed. Movement is not automatically development. A capability change is development, and not every ambitious employee needs a management path. Well, that is too broad in the other direction. Every capable employee needs a credible way to keep growing, and for some of them, that should not require people management. Build a leadership path around people, decisions, coordination, accountability, and organizational responsibility. Build a technical path around expertise, standards, quality, complex problem solving, training, mentoring, analysis, and specialized execution. They can intersect without becoming the same destination. Your best investigator may not want to be a lieutenant, your best mechanic may not want to run the shop, and your best engineer may not want half the day consumed by personnel issues. That does not make them less ambitious. Leadership is not a trophy for technical excellence. It is a different responsibility. Treating it like a trophy is how an organization turns one excellent technician into one unhappy manager and 6 employees quietly checking the transfer policy. Sixth, give developmental feedback before the promotional process. Keep it up. You are doing great, and your time will come may be encouraging, but they are not useful development. If somebody wants to lead, tell them what greater responsibility requires and where they currently stand against it. Tell them your technical judgment is strong, but you intervene too quickly when someone else struggles. Tell them you communicate well one-on-one, but your direction gets less precise when the shift gets busy. Or tell them you own your personal work, but I have not seen enough evidence that you can carry accountability for a team result. That is something the person can act on. The employee should ask for that level of feedback too. Do not only ask, what do I have to do to get promoted? Ask, what would make me more capable of carrying the responsibility? One question is about obtaining a position. The other is about becoming capable of the responsibility. Seventh, do not make development a penalty for being capable. Organizations do this constantly. Somebody shows initiative, so leadership rewards them with more work, the same authority, the same support, and the same compensation. Now they train the new employees, handle difficult customer issues, cover the supervisor, coordinate projects, and somehow still perform their original job. Then leadership wonders why the person who was supposedly being developed starts looking exhausted and applying elsewhere. You did not build a development path. You stacked the organization on their back. This is where the small business version becomes so stupid it practically animates itself. The high potential employee is pushing a pallet jack loaded with everybody else's responsibilities while management walks beside them saying, "This is excellent exposure," and payroll watches from behind reinforced glass. Funny picture, real problem. If the only recognizable difference between high potential and regular employee is that the high potential person gets 3 extra jobs, your talent program has become an endurance test with payroll. Developmental responsibility should be deliberate, bounded, supported, and connected to something meaningful. Otherwise, capability becomes the reason the organization keeps finding new ways to consume the same person. Where policy and resources allow, recognition might include acting pay, a specialty designation, funded education, protected training, increased autonomy, a credential, formal project ownership, mentoring, or a pay differential. Public sector systems may constrain some of those options, while small businesses may have more flexibility. Either way, do not use the word development to disguise sustained higher-level work with no honest discussion of authority, support, recognition, or compensation. If the organization needs sustained higher-level responsibility, address that honestly within whatever legal, contractual, policy, and financial limits apply. The same fairness goes the other direction, because one successful developmental assignment does not automatically entitle the employee to the next rank. The organization owes an honest read, and the employee owes honest performance. Eighth, protect some developmental capacity even when staffing pressure is real, and make succession a leadership responsibility. This is hard because today's demand is visible, and tomorrow's capability gap is not. The patrol car needs a person tonight, the production line needs an operator now, the clinic needs coverage, and the customer needs the order. The development consequence may not show itself for 18 months. Immediate problems are bullies like that. They show up loud, take the resources, and leave the future to file a complaint later. You may still have to pull people back to essential work. Fine. Make the trade-off consciously and replace the developmental mechanism you removed. If the training role disappears, where will future instructors get repetitions? If a specialty assignment closes, what capabilities was it building? If experienced people fill every gap, when do the people behind them learn? And ask a harder succession question. Who is more capable because you led them? If your entire legacy is that you personally performed well for 20 years and everyone underneath you remained dependent on your experience, you may have been highly competent without building much organizational capability. That distinction matters. If one person knows the critical process, one manager understands the schedule, one supervisor owns all the community relationships, or the owner makes every meaningful decision, the talented person is not the problem. The absence of transfer is. What looked like organizational capability may actually be personal capability on permanent loan, and that is not succession. That is hope with a name badge. Eventually the name badge retires, and apparently institutional memory gets a sheet cake. This is where the quarterly bench review becomes useful. Keep it simple. Which positions would hurt? If they became vacant tomorrow, who could carry them now? Who could carry them in 6 to 12 months? And what specific capability keeps the next person from being ready? What assignment could build it? Where is critical knowledge concentrated? Which capable people have stopped getting meaningful development? Then measure a few things that support decisions. How deep is the bench for critical roles? What keeps ready next people from becoming ready now? Are people receiving real developmental repetitions or only attending classes? And when a position opens, can you produce credible internal candidates? Which functions still depend on one person and are capable employees leaving because development or opportunity stopped? Do not measure course attendance and call it development. The person attended, good. What can they now do? What have they demonstrated? What responsibility have they carried? And what changed? That is the evidence. If succession only becomes visible at the retirement party, you do not have succession planning, you have catering. Now I want to come back to the individual listener because I have put a lot on senior leadership. You still own your side. A flat organization does not relieve you of responsibility for your own development, and a weak development system does not give you permission to replace evidence with frustration. Do not just say, I want to be a sergeant or I want to be a manager. Ask what that responsibility actually requires. Where is your judgment strong? Where have you never been tested? And where do you avoid conflict? Where do you take the work back instead of developing somebody? Where do you over-control, under-communicate, or rely on technical skill because your people leadership is not as developed? Those are development questions. Then look for legitimate repetitions inside your current authority. Train someone, own a project, coordinate a difficult handoff, conduct an after-action discussion, brief leadership, or volunteer for an assignment that exposes a weakness, instead of only volunteering for work you already know you can dominate. Development is not collecting situations that confirm you are good. Get feedback from people qualified to judge you, including people who will tell you when your read was weak. If every mentor tells you that you are amazing, either you have achieved a level of human perfection previously unknown to science or your feedback system is not working. You need somebody who can tell you you were technically correct and still made the situation harder, or you solved the problem instead of developing the person. That kind of feedback is useful if you do not spend the first 30 seconds defending yourself from it. Then build evidence. What have you led? What have you improved? And who became more capable because you helped them? What difficult decision did you own? What happened? And what changed in your behavior afterward? Ambition, confidence, time in service, and wanting the position very badly may fuel development. They do not prove readiness. And stop measuring yourself against whether the people around you seem as driven as you are. Maybe they are, maybe they are not, and maybe they want a completely different professional path. It does not change what you need to become capable of carrying. Measure yourself against the responsibility, not somebody else's ambition. That gives you something you can actually control. Comparison without context is mostly noise. This is where long-range observation inside CSA becomes the primary direct action connection for this mailbag. The immediate signal is the vacancy or the absence of one. The longer read is what the environment is building over time. For the individual, ask what another year in the organization is likely to buy you in capability. Are you gaining meaningful responsibility, stronger judgment, broader exposure, technical depth, useful relationships, and skills that transfer? If the title is standing still while those things are moving, the career may still be moving. For the senior leader, look forward in the same way. Who is likely to retire? Where is knowledge concentrated? Which capabilities will matter 2 or 3 years from now? And which developmental opportunities are disappearing because staffing is tight? What happens if 2 experienced people leave inside the same 12 months? What we need to understand is the part that matters is not whether you can predict every vacancy. You cannot. The part that matters is whether you can see enough of the capability picture to prepare before the pressure becomes immediate. That is what long-range observation does at the recognition level. It keeps today's staffing chart from becoming tomorrow's surprise. It helps the organization read what is developing before the vacancy turns the question into an emergency. CSA also keeps both sides from making the wrong diagnosis. A stalled promotion may be a structural bottleneck, a capability gap, a weak development system, a temporary lack of vacancies, or a path leadership never communicated well. Those conditions can feel similar from inside the role, but they do not lead to the same decision. If the employee flattens all of them into, "This organization does not value me," they can make a major career decision from a weak read. If senior leadership flattens all of them into, "People today are impatient," they can lose capable people because leadership refused to inspect the environment. Both are shortcuts. TMC matters when leaders start creating developmental work because not every repetition deserves the same level of leader involvement. Some work can be autonomous, some need supervision, and some needs direct leader involvement because the consequence is higher or capability is still developing. Match involvement to the person, task, authority, and consequence. Do not hand someone a high consequence responsibility they are not authorized or prepared to carry and call it empowerment. Do not micromanage every low-risk repetition until the person learns that the safest decision is waiting for you. Neither one develops capability. And pro matters because every path carries risk. There is risk in promoting someone before they are ready, failing to develop someone who could become ready, turning a technical expert into a manager they do not want to be, concentrating knowledge in one person, or protecting today's staffing so aggressively that tomorrow's bench disappears. The objective is not eliminating all of that risk. The objective is seeing it early enough to manage it deliberately. That is the broader direct action connection. Read the environment before the vacancy starts dictating the answer. Now let me make the senior leader takeaway executable. If you are a chief, director, owner, plant manager, operations leader, department head, or anybody sitting high enough to influence development, give yourself 30 days to build the first version of the bench. Do not turn this into a 6-month committee. In the first week, identify the critical leadership and continuity roles. Not every title, just the positions where an unexpected vacancy would materially hurt the operation. For each one, write down the few observable capabilities somebody actually needs to carry the responsibility. In the second week, assess the bench against those capabilities. Who is ready now, who is ready next, and who is developing? What evidence supports that read, and what specific capability keeps the next person from being ready? If you cannot explain the gap in plain language, your assessment is not finished. Needs more seasoning is not a developmental diagnosis. That is what people say when they know something is missing but would rather not identify it. In the third week, create 1 or 2 real repetitions tied to the gap. Planning experience requires actual planning. Coaching experience requires an appropriate opportunity to develop somebody. And cross-functional awareness requires a real coordination problem. Briefing skills require a briefing that matters. Accountability through others requires work where the result depends on coordinating people rather than personally doing everything. Keep the consequence appropriate to the person's authority and demonstrated capability. The goal is development, not organizational roulette. In the fourth week, establish the feedback and review cycle. Who observes? What gets discussed afterward? What should improve on the next repetition? And when will leadership review the bench again? Then put the quarterly review on the calendar and keep it small enough that it survives normal workload. For police leaders, use the advantages of being small. Fewer promotional seats are a disadvantage, but organizational distance can be shorter. Appropriate developing officers may be able to observe planning, understand staffing and budget trade-offs, participate in cross-unit work, learn from after-action reviews, and see how a decision at the point of service becomes a policy, communication, training, or community issue later. If your department cannot provide a certain experience, use regional training, neighboring agencies, outside education, or shared opportunities where policy and resources allow. You do not need to create a fake rank to create a real learning environment. Smallness can restrict promotion while increasing access. For the small business owner, use agility. Expose future leaders to the business beyond their task. Show them how labor affects margin, how inventory affects cash, how a customer promise affects scheduling, how purchasing affects production, and how a bad handoff becomes rework. Let them own a contained problem with a real consequence. Then review the result with them. Let them brief what happened and train somebody else. Small businesses sometimes say they do not have resources for leadership development when what they really mean is they do not have resources for a formal leadership program. And those are not the same thing. You need a process. define capability, create repetitions, provide feedback, increase responsibility deliberately, review readiness, transfer knowledge, and plan before the vacancy. That can fit on one page. But make development survivable for the current supervisor too. If every developmental assignment requires the supervisor to carry the employee's normal workload, observe the assignment, coach the person, fix every mistake, and still hit the exact same output target, development will disappear as soon as the operation gets busy. Design the repetitions so the people supporting them can actually support them and keep the deal fair. Do not create a development system whose hidden purpose is getting people to perform supervisor-level work indefinitely without the title, authority, support, or compensation. Temporary acting responsibilities and stretch assignments can be legitimate. Permanent higher-level responsibility disguised as development is something else. That can happen very easily in small organizations because informal arrangements become normal before anybody decides they became permanent. Somebody covers the supervisor for a week, then keeps covering, then starts scheduling, training, and answering questions. 6 months later, leadership calls it development while payroll still calls it Tuesday. That is where a temporary assignment quietly becomes free organizational infrastructure. The joke ends there because the fairness problem does not. If the organization needs sustained higher-level responsibility, address that honestly within whatever legal, contractual, policy, and financial limits apply. The same fairness goes the other direction. One successful developmental assignment does not automatically entitle the employee to the next rank. The organization owes an honest read. The employee owes honest performance. Neither side gets to substitute expectation for evidence. Now, when do you decide the organization can no longer support the growth you want? There is no universal number. Do not turn this into, if I am not promoted in 3 years, leave. Inspect whether capability is still moving. Are you receiving useful feedback, learning from people you respect, gaining responsibility, building transferable capability, and getting a clear read from leadership about what is possible? Can they explain what you still need to demonstrate? If those answers are yes, a stationary title can still sit inside a moving career. If the answers increasingly become no, update the read. Maybe the environment gave you what it could. Maybe your development has outrun the available opportunity, or another organization has a need that fits the capability you built. Leaving does not automatically mean the organization failed you, and staying does not automatically mean you lack ambition. Sometimes two good things simply stop fitting together. The organization needs the role you currently occupy, and you need a responsibility the organization cannot provide. That is a career decision, not necessarily a betrayal. Senior leaders need to hear the other side of that too. If a capable employee reaches the point where your structure cannot provide meaningful development or opportunity, do not automatically call the departure disloyal. A small organization cannot become everything for everybody. The failure is pretending it can and financing retention with promises you cannot support. I think the whole issue comes down to a simple distinction. A flat organization does not have to create a flat career. The title may stay still while capability grows, but somebody has to manage that development deliberately. The individual owns part of it, senior leadership owns part of it, the organization owns the conditions it creates. If you are the employee, stop attaching your development timeline to somebody else's retirement date. If you are the senior leader, stop treating the vacancy as the starting gun for leadership development. If you run a small organization, stop assuming you need the bureaucracy of a large institution before you can have its discipline. Take the useful lesson from the Army. Progressive development, increasing responsibility, education combined with experience and preparation before the vacancy. Leave the mass and the bureaucracy a small organization cannot support. Keep the developmental discipline. Look at what staffing pressure can do to policing. Immediate coverage requirements can quietly consume the developmental experiences needed to produce future supervisors. Look at small business, where strong individual contributors can become managers simply because a position opens. Institutional knowledge can concentrate in a handful of people, and succession can become urgent only after somebody gives notice. Then solve the common problem. Define capability before the vacancy, identify the bench, create real repetitions, observe performance, give honest feedback, build technical paths as well as supervisory ones, protect some developmental capacity, transfer knowledge, review readiness, and tell people the truth about opportunity. That is executable. And here's the inspection question I would leave senior leaders with. If one of your strongest employees walked into your office tomorrow and said, "I want to lead here someday, what should I be developing now?" Could you answer them with something more useful than eligibility requirements and encouragement? Could you tell them what leadership capability actually looks like in your organization? Could you tell them what they already demonstrate, where they are weak, what opportunity would help them practice, and what evidence would show improvement? If you cannot, do not be surprised if promotion becomes the only visible measure of growth. That may be the only signal you built. And if a resignation or retirement tomorrow would force your leadership team to begin asking who might be capable of carrying the responsibility, the vacancy is not your first problem. The absence of a development system is. A vacancy determines when a position becomes available, but it should not determine when preparation begins. Build the bench before the vacancy. Not because everybody needs a promotion and not because every great technician should become a manager. Build it because a healthy organization needs more people becoming capable of carrying its future than the exact number of empty chairs available today. That is the operating standard. When you are ready to go deeper with the direct action tools behind long-range assessment, capability development, task ownership, and risk, go to www.direct-action-system.io/course-directory. Open the course directory, find the course tied to the capability you need to develop, and start there. That is where the deeper application belongs. Thanks for listening to the briefing.